A wrinkled hand reached into the glowing mouth of a hearth that had burned continuously since before the Great Kantō Earthquake, and it did not pull out food. The indigo-dyed sleeve had been singed 100 times, each burn mark a signature of meals prepared in the dark hours. The hand belonged to a woman whose grandmother had learned to read the flames the way a sailor reads stars. Not by temperature, not by timer, but by the way the soot gathered on a certain earthenware pot that had never once been washed with soap. That pot sat in the center of the hearth, blackened not by a single fire, but by a chain of fires that stretched back 3 generations. Children in the village called it the grandmother pot, and they instinctively lowered their voices when they passed its alcove. To modernize, that pot would look ruined. Its surface had accumulated a crust of carbonized oil and charred grain so thick that the original clay was entirely hidden beneath a coat of gleaming black. Yet the broth that came from it carried a flavor that chefs in Tokyo train 20 years to approximate. The secret was not in the recipe. The recipe was simple. The secret was in what the pot had been doing, untouched by water, for 98 years. Here's the truth locked inside that crust. When lipids from animal fat and vegetable oils are heated in an unglazed clay vessel, they undergo a polymerization reaction. The molecules knit together into long chains that bond to the porous surface of the pot. Each meal adds another layer, and those layers begin to trap not just flavor compounds, but volatile aromatic molecules from every ingredient that has ever touched the pot. What the modern cook scrubs away as grime is actually a living flavor archive, a library of meals written in the language of polymers and phenols. And here is the beautiful part. The pot does not simply hold old flavors, it transforms them. The Maillard reaction compounds from a simmered fish from 1968 do not remain static. They interact with the reducing sugars from a sweet potato porridge from 2003, creating entirely new flavor molecules that could not exist outside the pot. The grandmother who last seasoned that vessel before she passed did not know the chemistry, but she knew the truth that the chemistry explains. The pot remembers, and it keeps cooking. If that idea sits with you, the quiet miracle of a vessel that remembers, then you already belong to a lineage that honors continuity over sterility. That is why we gather these stories, to help you see the hidden wisdom in everyday objects that the world teaches you to scrub away. Stay with this channel and we will keep uncovering the quiet archives hidden in heirloom cookware. And let us know in the comments, what is a flavor you can still taste from a pot or pan from your childhood? Now consider what this means for the pot in that Kyushu hearth. The woman who reached into it that evening was preparing a simple dish of miso and wild greens. The same meal her great-grandmother had prepared in the same vessel during the famine years after the war. She added no special ingredients, yet the broth tasted of something deeper than miso. It tasted of continuity, of a village that had survived by trusting its vessels more than its recipes. Stay with me here, because the story of this pot is not only about Japan. Scattered across the Korean peninsula, there are earthenware jars called jangdok. that have been fermenting soybean paste in the same location for over 100 years. The jars themselves are never moved, never washed on the inside, and their pores are saturated with the microbial ecosystems of the original ferments. A jangdok that has held doenjang for 80 years contains a fungal and bacterial community that is unique to that jar, that yard, that family. You cannot replicate the flavor in a laboratory because you cannot replicate the jar. If you have ever scraped a pan and wondered what flavor you were washing away, you know the quiet guilt of erasing a meal's ghost. That flicker of hesitation before the sponge hits the seasoned surface is not irrational. It is an ancient instinct. Your ancestors knew that the pot held memory. Somewhere along the line, the modern world convinced us that sterility was the highest virtue, and that any residue was filth. But the pot in that Kyushu hearth has never been sterile, and it has never made anyone sick. It has only ever made them well fed. This is where it gets interesting. In the 1970s, a Japanese researcher named Dr. Takeshi Nakao examined the lipid residues from a series of unwashed earthenware pots used by farming families in the Tohoku region. He found that the oldest residues, those deposited before the Meiji Restoration, contained measurable amounts of millet and wild buckwheat, crops that had disappeared from the local diet by the 1900s. The pots had preserved the memory of a lost agricultural system. The families who owned those pots had no written record of what their ancestors ate 100 years before. The pot itself was the archive. And so the story of this pot is also the story of a certain kind of wisdom that the modern world has been trained to overlook. When the first European traders arrived in Japan, they brought cast iron pots and insisted that clay vessels were unsanitary. Local potters watched as their own traditions were abandoned by wealthy families who wanted to appear modern. But the clay pots did not disappear. They retreated into the countryside, into the homes of farmers who knew that a washed pot is a silent pot, and a silent pot cannot feed a family through a harsh winter. Notice what happens next. The woman removes the pot from the hearth and sets it on a wooden trivet that has been worn smooth by the same motion performed tens of thousands of times. She does not measure the miso. She does not consult a recipe. She knows exactly how much to add because the pot tells her. The way it steams, the way the bubbles form, the way the crust on the bottom releases a specific aroma when the liquid level is correct. Her hands speak a language that her conscious mind does not translate. In Korea, this type of knowing is called sunmat, literally hand taste. It is the accumulated sensory memory of a lifetime of cooking with the same vessels, the same tools, the same fire. The jangdok jars are not just containers, they are teachers. A daughter learns to ferment by touching the jar, by smelling the steam that escapes the cloth cover, by feeling the weight of the vessel as the paste matures. The jar holds not only the paste, but the tacit knowledge of every woman who has cared for it. And this is the detail most people miss. The pot in the Kyushu hearth has a name. It is not a brand name or a maker's mark. It is a nickname passed down through the family. Yoru no Inochi, which means nightlife. It earned that name because during the bombing raids of World War II, the family would boil water in it after curfew, using the steam to signal neighbors that they were still alive. The pot became a communication device, a way to say we are here. We are still cooking. We are still a family. The crust on the bottom of Yoru no Inochi contains not just the lipids of meals, but the particulate matter of fires in the surrounding hills, the ash of buildings that burned, the salt of tears that fell into the broth. Every layer is a geological stratum of human experience. The researcher who analyzed similar pots found that the carbon deposits could be dated using radiocarbon methods, and that the layers corresponded precisely to known historical events. A famine in the 1830s, a particularly harsh winter in 1915, a festival in 1964 that involved a special meal for the entire village. Now here is the pivot that recontextualizes everything. The pot is not only an archive of the past, it is actively shaping the future, because every meal cooked in Yoru no Inochi leaves a new layer, and that new layer will interact with every meal for the next century. The woman who cooked that night was adding her own signature to a chain that her great-grandchildren will taste. She was not just making dinner. She was writing a letter to people she will never meet, in a language that has no alphabet but can be read on the tongue. And if you believe some pots deserve to keep their ghosts, then you have already felt what this story is pointing toward. There is a reason why the oldest earthenware vessels ever discovered from the Jomon period of Japan, dating back over 12,000 years, show the same carbonized residues. The pot has been a technology of memory since before writing existed. The first recipe was not a recipe at all. It was a pot that tasted of the meal before and that taught the next cook what the ancestors had liked. So let us return to the wrinkled hand and the hearth. The woman lifts the pot and pours the broth into a lacquer bowl. She does not wash the pot afterward. She sets it back on the edge of the hearth, still warm, and covers it with a wooden lid. The steam inside will continue to hydrate the crust, keeping the lipid layer alive and active. The pot will sit there until tomorrow evening, when the flame will be lit again and the cycle continues. There is a moment, just after she sets the pot down, when she touches its side with the back of her fingers. It is a gesture so fast that a camera would barely catch it, but it is a conversation. The pot is warm, it is satisfied, it is ready to rest. She is saying thank you without words. And the pot is responding with the only language it has. The memory of heat. The promise of tomorrow's meal. Every time you scrub a pot to bare metal, you erase a lineage. If you believe some pots deserve to keep their ghosts, share this video with someone who still cooks with a vessel that has seen a few decades. Let them know that grime can be wisdom, and that the pot they inherited from their grandmother might be worth more than any recipe book. And if you ever find a vessel that has not met the soapy sponge in 50 years, listen closely. It may have a story worth tasting. Subscribe with Miso, and let us keep the old rituals alive together. The pot cools, and the kitchen settles into the dark. The only sound the settling of embers and the faint crackle of the lipid crust tightening as it re-solidifies. The woman does not look at the pot again. She does not need to. The ritual is complete, and the vessel has done its work, holding the day's story within its walls until tomorrow. This is the rhythm that has sustained families through famine, through war, through the quiet erosion of time itself. It is a rhythm that no app can replicate, no algorithm can optimize. That rhythm, that quiet ritual, it is slipping away in a world that values efficiency over memory. If you want to hold on to it, come back for the next chapter, where we will explore a Jiangdok jar that has been fermenting for over a century. And in the comments, share the name of a kitchen tool or vessel that your family has passed down, because every object has a story worth tasting. And so the truth at the bottom of the grandmother pot is this: we have been lied to about cleanliness. We have been taught to fear the patina that is actually proof of life, proof of continuity, proof that we belong to a chain of hands that prepared meals before us and will prepare meals after us. The pot is not a relic. It is a standard bearer. It holds the flag for a kind of cooking that refuses to start from zero every time. The night deepens over Kyushu, and Yoru no Inochi sits patient and warm.
A bead of moisture,
It has already forgotten the meal because it is thinking about the next one. That is what an archive does. It does not dwell on the past. It makes the past available for the future. The hand that reached into the hearth is now resting. The pot is resting. The story is not over. It is simply waiting for the fire to be lit again.